Hey folks, it's Katie. I just opened up today's Zoom webinar. We are getting folks on via Facebook and Zoom. We will get started in just a moment, but thank you so much for joining us for today's last census update call, and we will get started in just a moment. Okay, friends, I think we are officially live on Facebook. Apologies for our slow start. I am currently using two different computers for today's census update because we're doing some fun polling towards the end of today's call. But thank you so much for joining us. Let me go ahead and get our slides up since we are officially live on Facebook now. Just give me 2 seconds. Okay, folks, we're officially in business. Again, apologies, using a new computer today. Thank you for hanging in there with us. But first, welcome to our last Texas Counts census update. Wow, I can't believe that I'm saying it is our last one. We all know that it has been an extremely wild ride to get to where we are at today. So thank you for tuning in today. Thank you for continuing to tune in with us as we have done this census work over the past year, over the past few years. I know many of you have been engaging in the 2020 census for a very, very long time. And we are so thankful that you have been in it till the very end. As you know, I am joined by my two fabulous co-presenters who have been in this work with me for a very long time as well, and I could not do this without them. But we are joined by Dr. Lila Valencia from the Texas Demographic Center, and then Genesis Sanchez from NALEO. We are waiting for Genesis to join us. I'm hoping that she will be able to, but if not, we do have her slides already populated in today's slide deck, so it will be easy for her to kind of jump in whenever, if she's able to join us today. But today is going to be a little bit different than what we normally do on our census updates calls. Yes, we're still going to kind of give you an update in terms of what's going on with the 2020 census, but we also want to kind of set aside some time and space to let you know a little bit more about us and the organizations that we work for. As you may or may not know, our organizations do a lot of other work just besides the 2020 census, but all of our missions directly connect to the census. And so we want to just talk about ways that you can continue, hopefully, to engage with us and our work as it directly relates and connects with the census information and data. In addition to that, the thing that I am really excited for today is that we are going to try to do some live Q&A polling during today's webinar. So it's going to be interactive, so you can't just listen to our voices today. We want to hear from you too. That will be coming in just a little bit, and hopefully it will be a seamless process, but I will be sure to explain everything when we get there. As always, for folks tuning in, do know that you can use our Q&A box, chat box, anytime that you want to speak up or connect. We will be monitoring those. And for my friends on Facebook Live, we are also monitoring the comment box there too. And we are so glad that you are here with us. But with that, I just kind of already went through the agenda for you, but like I said, it's a little bit different. I just put our names for those slides, and bear with me very quickly. I'm going to take us to Dr. Valencia's slides. So take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Katie, for bringing us together one last time to talk about the 2020 census. I just want to thank each and every one of you, first of all, for helping us come together and provide this information and coming back week after week to hear from us about the information we had to share. It was really helpful. Seeing all of you present and attentive and engaged week after week. And we knew that we weren't just, talking to midair. We knew that you guys were taking all of this information and putting it to work on the ground. And we are so grateful for all of your efforts. And thank you, Katie and Texas Counts, Robin and Aaron and the whole team, Jamie, for bringing us together and really helping us to reach all of the different groups across the state. Such a big state, such an incredible undertaking, and somehow we managed to do it pretty well. And so today I'm going to kind of be covering a little bit about, well, how well did we do? And I want you to know that I just think you should be extremely proud of all of your efforts. So I'll share a few of the things that we have in terms of metrics to share with you today, as of today, and then I'll just wrap up with a little bit about our organization that hopefully will that you will be able to engage with in the future in terms of the services and data products that we can offer to you. So if you don't mind, Katie, moving on to this next slide, I'll start sharing what happened or where we are at the end of the 2020 census count. So in Texas, we ended up with a 62.8% self-response and a 37.1% enumerated response through the non-response follow-up operation, getting us to a 99.9% total response rate, according to the Census Bureau's estimates. The Census Bureau provided that enumerated total response rate for states, and all of the states and territories in the country were able to reach that 99.9%, with the exception of the state of Louisiana. Louisiana was at about 99%. And so this, of course, is made up by both the self-response and the non-response follow-up. And I want you to look at that number of 62.8%, because that is the number that you help to really become a reality for the state of Texas. That is like the direct indication of the hard work and effort that you put into this. So thank you so much. And yes, we did not quite reach our 2010 response rate. Our 2010 response rate was 64.4%. But this census was supposed to be the easiest censuses in history. We were going to be able to respond online for the very first time, by mail, by telephone. And we had so many plans in place that were really going to make responding to the 2020 census much easier than it had ever been before. And of course, a lot of things changed after the COVID-19 pandemic. But I still want you to know that we came pretty close, and that a number of places in Texas did reach those 2010 response rates. And maybe I can show that to you in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So here we are in Texas. You can see, you'll remember that this map, when we first started looking at it and looking at the data that the Census Bureau was putting together, we had a whole lot of burnt orange and orange and light yellow. And, on the last day of data collection, many more counties were able to get into that blue color spectrum, which meant that we were over 50%. Self-response rates in Texas counties ranged from as high as 75.8% in Fort Bend County to about as low as 18.6% in Edwards County. And Edwards County, for those of you that don't know, is over in West Texas between the border and the Hill Country. And it's a county that has a fairly small population, but has a lot of challenges too. Highly rural, so they had a high update leave universe. They also have a high share of Hispanic population in particular that lives very close to or right at the poverty line. And so those challenges can be seen in that low self-response rate. And of course, that's just the self-response rate, right? We don't have any information on how much of the work was completed or enumerated by non-response follow-up in that particular county. But 29 of the 254 counties that we had in Texas actually met or surpassed their 2010 self-response rate. And then 283 cities in the state of Texas were also able to surpass their 2010 self-response rate. Next slide. So here's where we are in the country as a whole. This information was made available by the Census Bureau last week. We were able to attain nationally a total response rate of 99.98% of all housing units and addresses in the country. The 2020 self-response rate was 67.0%, which was actually a half percentage point higher than the 2010 self-response rate. This was one of the metrics that the Census Bureau was looking at, and they're very proud that they were able to surpass that 2010 response rate, especially given the challenges that were presented this decennial census. 32.9% were enumerated through non-response follow-up, and 24.1% of that NRFU workload, the non-response follow-up workload, was enumerated through proxy. So of all of the households that were visited, 24.1% was enumerated through proxy. And again, you'll recall that proxy is when an actual person in the household is not available to respond. And so the census enumerator goes to a landlord or to a neighbor to try to get information about that household. This percentage point is actually pretty close to the percentage that was used in 2010. About 23% of the total non-response follow-up universe or workload in 2010 was enumerated through proxy. So you can see that it was a little bit higher this time around, but not by much. And then 5.6% of the addresses nationwide, this is all of addresses, were resolved using administrative records. And this is about 13.9% of the NRFU workload. And you'll remember that administrative records include things like federal tax returns. They include things like school enrollment. I'm losing my train of thought here, but it's the county appraisal numbers. And so we think that a lot of the administrative records that were used as this 5.6% right now are for information to determine whether a housing unit was vacant or not. And in the future, some of these numbers will change because particularly around the use of administrative records, because some of the individual household data within the household may need to be filled using administrative records. So for instance, if a person filled out the census form for their household, and so they were not enumerated during non-response follow-up, but they actually responded and they were not available for a follow-up, then the Census Bureau may have to fill in information for any missing questions. So if they counted a child, but the child's date of birth wasn't included, they may use administrative records to fill in those sorts of information. So some of these numbers may change, but this is what was available as of October 15th. Next slide, please. The Census Bureau does a number of quality checks. So, this slide really speaks to, well, what comes next? How are we going to know how good these data or how bad these data were that were collected? They engage in what are called coverage measures to really try to understand, how much of the country was covered during this census count. And these measures are where we get all of the information that we've been sharing when we've been trying to motivate people to respond to the census. So we've talked about the hard to count communities, and we've talked about how we had an undercount of nearly 1 million children under 5. And so these measures are what inform those statistics and talking points. And there's about two different types of coverage measures. The first one is the post-enumeration survey. The Census Bureau is currently conducting this survey. And so basically they go back to a small sample of households that participated in the 2020 census to check the accuracy of the data that were collected. This post-enumeration survey will wrap up and be available to the findings from this study as early as November of 2021 and then through February of 2022. The other type of coverage measure study or analysis that the Census Bureau produces is a demographic analysis. They produce population estimates using administrative records like vital statistics, estimates of international migration, and other records to understand how the population is growing. And so, for instance, the Texas Demographic Center, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in the next couple of slides, but we only have the 2020 census count, right? But in between that time, the Texas Demographic Center is tasked with producing population estimates. And what we do is we start with that base estimate count of 2010 is what we were using before. And when the data are available for 2020, we'll start with the 2020 baseline. And then we add all of the births that took place that year. We take out all of the deaths. We insert estimates for the number of people that moved into the state of Texas, make estimates for the number of people that moved out. And then we are able to see what the population should be in 2019 or in 2021. So in a non-census year, right? So the Census Bureau does a similar exercise as well. And so they're going to be releasing their first level of demographic analysis this December. Many of you may know already, but usually the end of the year is in the news cycle. You'll hear the country has reached this population count, where the state of Texas is now at this population count. Those figures come from this demographic analysis. And when we look at that demographic analysis and we compare it to what the 2020 census count found, then we are able to understand where the big gaps are and the big discrepancies, and be able to understand where we may have had some issues in coverage in the 2020 census. And there's a couple of links there for more information on some of these measurements. If you want to find out a little bit more, you can definitely go to those links for that information. Next slide, please. And so now I'll tell you a little bit about what we do and how we hope to continue our collaboration and our partnership with many of you on the line. The Texas Demographic Center is the lead demographic agency in the state of Texas. And what that means is that we are the office of the state demographer. The state demographer, Dr. Lloyd Potter, is an appointed position, and he was appointed by the Texas governor. As part of the legislation that covers the state demographer's office and the state demographer itself, the state demographer gets support staff that's affiliated with a public state university. That public university is the University of Texas at San Antonio. At UTSA, we have the Texas Demographic Center, and then we also have an Institute for Demographic and Socioeconomic Research. We work through our legislative mandates. We work to monitor demographic shifts and understand what kinds of implications those shifts could have on state planning and policy making. But beyond that, we do this and we make these data available to anyone who's interested in demographic trends or shifts in our state. And so, for instance, year round, we make presentations to chambers of commerce who are trying to understand what's going on in the Texas economy. We present to nonprofits who are trying to understand whether their goals and mission are aligned with the challenges that are in the state of Texas. We also provide all of our data to different state agencies for their own planning. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. But the state demographer or the Texas Demographic Center is also a member of two key groups that will be very critical in the evaluation of the 2020 census data. We are part of the US Census Bureau State Data Center program. And so there are 53 other state data centers, including some territories. And we gather every quarter virtually to discuss and get updates from the Census Bureau. And then we meet for an annual meeting to really help and understand how we can better disseminate and promote Census Bureau, how we can make sure that we are training folks and demographic data users in our state on Census Bureau data and Census Bureau programs. And we all hold, most of us will hold an annual demographic data users conference. We hold our demographic data users conference usually in late May or early June. And so you'll definitely get an invitation to participate in that for us for our next one in 2021. And then as part of the State Data Center program, we have an affiliates network that's made up of government and academic nonprofit organizations who also use demographic data and provide data and training to other users around the state, whether it be a regional sort of focused organization or a mission specific group. And so we have an affiliates network that includes a lot of the councils of governments. Every Texan is an affiliate in our affiliates network, a number of state agencies. And so if you are interested in becoming a part of our affiliates network, we would be happy to talk with you about what the responsibilities and what that role entails. But it really helps us to be able to stay connected with the data needs of users of demographic data across the state. And you can go to our website to see who our affiliates are as of right now. And then the other organization that we're a part of is the US Census Bureau's Federal and State Cooperative for Population Estimates. And then there's also a federal state cooperative for population projections. So this is a group of academics and a group of researchers that come together and work with the US Census Bureau to keep abreast of the latest demographic analysis and analytical techniques, and to make sure that we are all doing good work in providing those estimates between decennial census years. Both of these groups have been critical in maintaining or holding the Census Bureau accountable and asking them to maintain transparency in terms of their operations, in terms of recruiting, in terms of a number of things. And so one of the things that both of these organizations will be doing as well is making sure that those metrics of quality and coverage are made available by the Census Bureau. And so the Texas Demographic Center may not on its own put out, an op-ed or something, but we will absolutely use our membership in the State Data Center and the Federal State Cooperative to really promote and encourage the Census Bureau to produce those products and make those available to users. Next slide, please. And so I mentioned really quickly that we produce those population estimates for the state between decennial years, and we also produce population projections that look beyond the decennial census 40 years into the future for long-term planning. And so our population estimates are actually produced every year, and we produce estimates for the state, for all of its 254 counties, and for its over 1,700 places and cities. We provide these estimates by sex, race and ethnicity, and by age for the state and for counties. We typically release these in the fall. Right now, we've released our 2019 estimates on a preliminary basis. We are actually encouraging local officials to review those estimates and provide feedback to us. Once they've provided feedback, we will incorporate their local intelligence and update those and move the preliminary estimates to the final estimates, which would happen probably the first week of November. So if when you're looking for those numbers, and we've all been talking about these population estimates that are funded or that are that use census derived data, this is exactly one of those examples of those programs. State agencies, state programs, federal programs use population estimates like those from the Texas Demographic Center to allocate those resources of over $1.5 trillion in federal funds, right? And so these are the numbers that you will see, and we're the party that produces them. So if you ever have a question about those, or if you ever feel like the numbers that are coming out for your area don't quite make sense, we have a feedback mechanism in place. We have a review panel, and if you are much more quantitatively inclined or part of one of those elected official bodies like a county judge's office or a city office that's working with a city manager or a mayor, we will be happy to add you to our review panel, or at least to our reviewer list, to be able to tell us if anything does not make sense to you at the ground level, because you know your area best, right? And then we do population projections where we look 40 years into the future from the last decennial census. So right now we're looking 40 years into the future from 2010. When the 2020 census data are available, we'll look 40 years into the future from that. And we provide those projections again with sex, race, ethnicity, and age detail for the state and all of its 254 counties. So when we want to understand how many people turned 18 and became eligible to vote in 2019, these are the projections that we're using. When we want to understand what that electorate might look like in 2022, these are the sorts of data that you can use to extract that information. And again, it's based on the foundation for this is the 2020 census data. So clearly the accuracy of that data is very important to the work that we do. And this is the last slide I think I have, Katie, if you don't mind moving forward one more slide. So this is how you can partner with us. Absolutely reach out to us with all of your demographic data needs. We are here to help you, from simple, statistics requests for talking points to more in-depth demographic studies. If you need technical support for GIS or other data visualization projects, absolutely reach out to our organization. Invite us to present to your organization. We do presentations all over the state. Visit and attend our demographic conference in late May or early June. And then again, when you go to that list of affiliates networks, if you think, I want to be a part of this, I think we, have this need and provide these services, and we could really, benefit from this collaborative relationship, reach out to us and let us know. And then lastly, like I mentioned, join our estimates and projections review panel. If you feel like you have a good understanding for what the population growth is in your area and you want to make sure that we know about that, then reach out to us and make sure to join our review panel. And that's all that I have, Katie. Of course, people have our contact information, and so they should be able to, use that to get a hold of us. And we'd love to continue this relationship with you through to the next decennial census. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Valencia, for sharing out all of this really great information and how folks can continue connecting with you. Yes, if you are interested in connecting with Dr. Valencia or the Texas Demographic Center, do know that all the slides and recording and links will be available to y'all very soon, so you can connect. And then also, I think this goes without saying that here in the state of Texas, we are so lucky and we are so fortunate to have Dr. Lila Valencia and how she was able to make data with the 2020 census make sense. I know when I first got into this work, it was all a little confusing in terms of hard to count populations and self-response and all of these different in and outs of when it comes to the data associated with the census. And I am just so thankful, as I'm sure many of us on this call are, that how every week she broke down the data for us and explained things to us. And so from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of the Texas Counts campaign, just wanted to say a big, big thank you for Dr. Valencia's just invaluable contributions to the Texas Counts work and to getting out the count in Texas. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, as I said before, we do have Genesis joining us, which we are so excited that she was able to connect with us today. And so we're going to rewind back to her slides, and I'm going to hand it over to Genesis.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Katie. Sorry for jumping on late here. Next slide. So like Katie shared, and as Dr. Valencia shared, I just want to express my gratitude to everybody on the call. I know I didn't necessarily work with everybody here, or we didn't have a chance to collaborate one-on-one, but know that this idea was something that Lila and Katie and I sat down and talked about one day, and we never knew that it was going to happen in a pandemic. We just thought, how can we be most helpful to people, considering that all three of us had a really heavy travel schedule and we each had different strengths inside of the census work. And so we wanted to be able to share that. And I know for me, when I jumped on, I never knew, more than a year ago that I would become pretty proficient at understanding the census operations. Never in my life did I think that's what I was going to do this year, but that's okay. And I hope that in doing that work, I helped, make your lives a little bit easier. But thank you so much for joining us. Next slide. So I wanted to, I feel like we're going a little bit backwards, but I think this is great too. And sharing a little bit more about who NALEO Educational Fund is and how we can continue to collaborate and support one another. NALEO Educational Fund is a nonprofit. I am the manager here for the Texas office, the regional offices. The Texas office is based in Houston, but we work statewide. And our mission really is to encourage full Latino participation in the American political process. And so we've been working, you can go to the next slide, Katie. We've been working on the census as kind of our issue area for many years. But typically we actually have three major strategies that we invoke. So the first is the policy research and advocacy. And this group inside of our organization is super helpful when it comes to the census and helping us distill a lot of the legislative action around the census. Then it's our constituency services. NALEO stands for the National Association of Latino Electeds and Appointed Officials. And so we work directly with this group to ensure that they're prepared to lead our government and our constituents, and that they have the tools to do so. And then lastly, where I fall under is under our civic engagement. Next slide. And so under our civic engagement umbrella, we have three main buckets. First is the census, which is was our baby up until a few days ago. Many of our staff have worked on the census. This is probably the third or fourth census for them. And so there was a lot of institutional knowledge, and knowing that we came into the world, I know I did, with that in mind. And so obviously, we worked on the 2020 census, and we're looking forward to redistricting, to having conversations around that as well. We also do GOTV, getting out the vote, and election protection. We focus on local, state, and federal elections. And we have a hotline for all of these pockets. So you can see our Censo hotline is actually still running because we're still funded, and we were hopeful that we were going to be funded through. We were hopeful the census was going to run through the end of the month. And then we have our VEI Vota hotline as well. And these all act as informational and protection hotlines. And then lastly, we have our naturalization work. And currently in this new era, we're doing a lot of virtual workshops and consultations. And that hotline is listed here as well. And so both the voting and the naturalization hotline are the same. Our voting one, it just gets ramped up prior to any election. Next slide. So we're part of the election protection hotlines. We're one of 4. So these hotlines are meant to provide voters with critical election information, help them resolve any issues, and document any irregularities. Next slide. And so to kind of round us out, I just wanted to share some GOTV resources that we have that I hope will make your life a lot easier as we finish out the next week. And so we have an email blast here that's full of our digital resources, more social media graphics. There's some overlap in these 2 links that I'll share in the chat. But you know, if you want to promote our hotline, our website, or if you want a Zoom background or an email signature so you can remind people to go out and vote, it's all included here. We have postcards that also remind folks to go out and vote and what they should know prior to going to the polls. We have what we call our 2020 Latino Election Handbook, which just goes to show some of the challenges that Latinos will be facing in the 2020 election and some projected numbers on how many Latinos are going to show up and in what areas. And then we also have really short template scripts that encourage Latino voters to go out to the polls. So if you're still looking for information and background like that, it's here as well. And then tomorrow we actually have a week of action webinar. We know there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation that's targeting not just Latino voters, but a lot of communities of color. And so if this is of interest to you and you want to help us, especially as we round out the last week of voting, please do join us. I find this to be very helpful, and I think an increasingly an unfortunate part of our election work is to manage so much misinformation and disinformation that's targeted to our communities. And so please do join us. Next slide. Thank you. And then lastly, as I mentioned, the voter hotline really is kind of our main focus right now, considering that we anticipate getting pretty much thousands of calls, both on November 2nd and November 3rd. November 2nd, because as many of you know, people do get ready. If they leave their vote until the last day, they have a lot of questions. And so we want to be available to them. But we're still looking for volunteers. If you want to register, you can do so at this link. And we have 2 trainings, one that's today and one tomorrow. And so, you know, if you have any questions on this piece, you can also email me directly as well. And I'd be happy to talk to you about it one-on-one. And I think the last slide is just a copy of our postcard, so you guys can take a look at it. So again, you know, I think as we move into 2021, we're really looking forward to collaborating with all of you, continuing these conversations. The census isn't over yet. As much as, you know, we're not out there getting out the count. We know that, you know, in this volatile political environment, we still have a ways to go. And so, you know, at any point, if you guys have questions or if you want to collaborate on any future event, know that we're here to support your work and to amplify it as well. And with that, thank you all so much. I really appreciate you all. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you, Genesis. Lots of amazing resources. NALEO is such a great organization, and we are so lucky to have Genesis in Texas, so we can reach out to her for all of these different civic engagement issues. And again, just a big thank you to Genesis for keeping us updated on the operations of the 2020 census. We all know this has been such a crazy, crazy wild ride, and Genesis every week brought the information to us, broke it down, made it extremely digestible. I know that I learned so much from her. And if you haven't gotten the opportunity to really work closely with Genesis, she is amazing and wonderful. And we are so lucky to have her. So thank you. Big thank you to Genesis for joining us each week and for all the amazing efforts she's led across the state of Texas to help us get out the count. Extremely thankful. Now we are going to switch gears. And I'm really excited for this part of today's call. I hope it works, but we are really wanting some participation from you all. And so what we're hoping to do today is I have about 8 questions. I don't think we're going to get through all of those in the next 15 minutes, but don't worry, there's still going to be opportunities to kind of provide your feedback and insights and expertise. But we just kind of want to get a feel and reflect on where we are at as census champions, as our Get Out the Count efforts really start winding down. I think I've said this a million times, but I'm going to say it 1,000,001 times. You all are the experts on the 2020 census in Texas. You were the ones on the front lines ensuring your communities were counted. You were the ones in leadership positions ensuring that organizations or your networks were continuing to engage in this work. You have carried the torch for the 2020 census for an extremely long amount of time during unprecedented circumstances. And with all of this information that you have gathered, all of these skills that you've gathered, it's really important for us to make sure that we tell the story of the 2020 census. We tell your story about what getting out the count looked like in 2020 and thinking about future censuses and how Texans can continue engaging their communities and what practices work and which ones don't work. So with that, I've broken down a couple of reflection questions into different buckets. Again, we're not going to get to all of those today, but it is okay. And so what we're going to do is first talk about GOTC efforts. And so we have 2 questions before you. And the first one being, what GOT strategies were the most effective for you and your community? And so in order to respond to this question, this is where it might get a little confusing, but you can take your smartphone, pull up your camera app and scan that QR code, and it will take you directly to the website where you can answer this question from your phone. You can also click on this link, and I'm going to put all of the links into the chat box so that you can respond to all of these questions in real time. And so, like I said, let's see if this works. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. And if this app is too confusing, feel free to put your comments or your thoughts into the chat box or on the comment section on Facebook. But the first question we have is, during this time, what Get Out the Count strategies were the most effective for you in your communities? So again, you can scan this link or with your phone, or you can click on the link in your in the Word doc that I just sent, and I'll send the direct link as well to see if we can start getting some responses from folks. Okay, we're starting to get some responses in, which is really exciting. People were saying car caravans, partnerships with schools, phone banking, community events, door-to-door canvassing, partnering with the food bank, using social media, distribution at in-person events safely, sending out census text messages, social media, again, has been a really big one for us during this time. I'm so glad that this is working and we're getting responses in. I was a little bit nervous, but thank you for participating. We are getting a lot of results in. And if you're on that Google Doc, you should be able to click on the see the live results, and you can see them actually populating, which is really fun and exciting. In the interest of time, do know that you can still respond to this question, But part two of this kind of first question is, we're curious if there are any resources that you wish you could have had to help you get out your count, to help get out the count. So that means, did you need more money, more data products, training, digital support, communication support? What else could you have received from the Texas Counts campaign, from the Census Bureau, from any other partners, your city, your county, to really ensure that your community got an accurate count? So second question, what could have really helped in your efforts, thinking back? And I'm seeing results starting to come in now, and it's looking like a big one, which I don't think is a surprise to many of us, is that funding really was something that we needed to help us continue getting out the count in our communities. More resources, more materials, just trainings around phone bankings and different type of outreach efforts. But it seems like, which I think makes a lot of sense, is that we just needed more money in the state of Texas. We needed more funding to really support our efforts as we got out the count. I believe that these questions will continue to stay live, but we are going to move on to our next set of questions. And again, I'll make sure to share these out with folks because this is a lot of really great information we're gathering. And yes, a lot of it is around resources, funding, volunteers, having the capacity to really get out the count. So thank you for that feedback. Now I want to switch gears to talk a little bit more specifically about Texas Counts. And so the first question that I have, and I will put this in the chat box, a link, because this is a separate link from our first set of questions, is, was this your first time engaging in a statewide campaign? And then part two of that question, oops, getting too ahead of myself. So first question, yes or no, was this your first time participating in a statewide campaign? There's the link to scan to answer it, as well as the actual URL. And then the part two of that question is, what was the most helpful part of Texas Counts? We offered you all lots and lots of different ways to connect and engage. We know some of them might have worked really well. We know some of them probably didn't work that well, but we tried at the end of the day. So curious to hear from folks in terms of what from Texas Counts really, really worked well and what didn't. And I'm going to go ahead and switch questions from our campaign questions so you can start putting in what you really liked about Texas Counts. And looking back on the first time participating in a statewide campaign, it seems like for many of us, this was our first time really engaging in this statewide effort like this. In terms of what was most helpful with Texas Counts, it looks like a lot of that being just the frequent and accurate updates, the data analysis, Dr. Valencia's data analysis, the weekly webinars, and just pitching different get out the count strategies, bringing together folks in a unique way. These are great. Thanks for providing this feedback. This is really helpful for us. I'm going to keep this one open a little bit longer because people are currently typing in. Very appreciative of that. But it looks like kind of the biggest help from us was definitely providing real-time accurate information for folks, which we were so happy to provide for everyone. Results keep coming in terms of what was the most helpful part of Texas Counts. Again, don't worry, we're gonna provide you more opportunities to provide feedback, but I am going to switch to our next question, which is specifically about the 2030 census. It might sound crazy that I'm already talking about 2030 when we're still in 2020 and we haven't even wrapped up our current decennial census. But thinking ahead, are you interested in helping get out the count in 2030? Are you interested in doing this work again and ensuring your community is counted? So that's the first question for our next, and let me get that QR code up for you. And thank you, everyone. This is going a lot better than I thought it would. So appreciate everyone's feedback and participation in our quick little reflection. So yes, first question, knowing what you know, would you do all of this over again? Would you ensure that we get an accurate count? I'm really excited. I'm not sure if y'all are able to see the live results, but for folks that are participating in our real-time reflection, there hasn't been any no's yet. Everyone says yes, which I'm really excited about, that you are interested in helping and continue get out the count efforts in 2030. On the flip side of that, again, you are the experts in this work. You've been doing this for a really, really long time now. What advice would you give to someone in the future who is hoping to engage and get out the count efforts? I know that 2030 is going to look very different than 2020, but just thinking back, what were some of those key principles or key things that really just kind of clicked in terms of engaging communities and getting out the count? So I'll pause there to see if we can get some thoughts and feedback around that. And the first thing that I see coming in is, and not even that, just everyone is like, please start earlier. Making sure that you're connecting with folks and coordinating so you're not duplicating services. This is all extremely helpful, great feedback. Of course, being nimble, being able to switch, to be adaptable, to pivot. I think those are definitely the themes from us for the 2020 census. Getting folks engaged, involved as early as possible. I think kind of a theme from what I'm seeing coming in is just time-wise, ensuring that we're kind of giving ourselves the time and space to actually get an accurate count and making sure that we're engaging folks as well. And then a lot of people are talking about be flexible, be adaptable, be able to pivot. Thank you again for participating. This is great. I hope that y'all can see the live results from the links in that Google Docs. So it's really fun to kind of see these come in real time. And so I know we still have responses coming in, so please feel free to keep getting those in just because we love it. We appreciate the feedback. And now I want to switch gears to kind of our final question for this. And my next question is, what words would you use to describe the 2020 census? When I think back on our time together, it's definitely for me learning, perseverance, ingenuity, and just gratitude for the amazing work that has been done across the state. And so the next question that I have is, if you were to think of a word or multiple words like I used to describe the 2020 census and the work that you've done or engaged in, what would that be? What would those words be? And we are getting in some live responses again, which is so fun. I'm seeing crazy, Herculean, heroic, unprecedented, unusual. I said crazy already, but I'm going to say it again because it was very crazy. Frustrating, yes, I feel that as well. Marathon, roller coaster, these are amazing. If you can see the live results coming in, this is one of those fun little word clouds, and really fun getting to see folks respond to this question. And my last question, again, in the interest of time, and this is probably my favorite question, is I just want to know, we want to know, what are you most proud of in your 2020 census work? What is that thing that we should be celebrating, that we should be giving you accolades and awards and a standing ovation for? What are you most proud of in the time that you've worked on the 2020 census? And we are getting in those responses right now. A theme that I'm seeing is people are really thankful for the new partnerships that they created during this time, the collaborations, the connections that they've made. People are patting themselves on the backs, as they should be, for just being able to adapt and pivot during these extremely trying times. Working really hard to engage undercounted populations, engaging folks, thinking about different age groups, different ethnicities, races, genders, sexual orientation, gender identity, in terms of just getting out the count and engaging them to make sure that they were empowered to complete the 2020 census. Um, Talking about how their regions just really made some really big impacts and movements in terms of really getting to move the needle forward on getting out the counts. This is probably, like I said, this is probably my favorite one, and I won't lie, I probably will read through these later and feel some good emotions around them, maybe shed a tear or two, because I have been so grateful and so thankful to be able to be doing this work with each and every one of you. I know that I might not have spoken to you personally, but I know many of you have been hearing my voice over the past year, over the past several months. And the thing that I am most proud of in terms of the 2020 census is each and every one of you, and how, again, you got out the count in just the most chaotic time. And I am just impressed by your resiliency, by your ability to pivot, by your creativity and ingenuity to really adapt and make sure that your community is counted, and understanding the importance of our undercounted populations, and just wanting to empower folks to respond and participate in the 2020 census, because each and every one of you knows how important this is for our communities. And so, again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for your continual engagement in the 2020 census and making sure your communities are counted and heard through this process. In terms of what's next for Texas Counts, you have not gotten rid of us quite yet. One thing that I said at the beginning of this is that we really want to honor the work that you have done over the past year and past years even. And we really want to ensure that we're accurately telling the story of the 2020 census in Texas, because this is for sure one for the record books. And so if you are wanting to help us kind of put together this report, one, you already did by participating today in our live questions. Two, we're going to be sending out a pretty robust survey coming very soon, hopefully, if not by the end of this week, early next week. And this is just an opportunity for folks to really kind of give us that thoughtful feedback in terms of what worked in your community, what didn't work, what you learned. This will kind of give us a better understanding of where we're at in Texas with the 2020 census, but also hopefully give us some good grounding for when we start work on the 2030 census. In addition to that, if surveys aren't your thing and you like conversations as much as I do, we're also going to be providing some small group reflections. I'll be sure to send out the sign up link for those there here. We're going to be doing these after the election. So if you're wanting to kind of connect with Census Champions one more time, we're hoping to lead some kind of talking small group reflections over Zoom. And then last but not least, if there is any information that you think would be really helpful to include in this giant report, please send it my way. I know that all of you all have my email address, and if not, I'll make sure that you have it. But again, we really need your voices in this report, because yes, the data and the numbers tell us things, but I'm really interested in terms of that qualitative data about your experiences, your firsthand experiences on the ground getting out the count. So I hope that you all will be able to help us put this report together. And don't worry, we'll be sending you an email about how you can engage and be involved in this process. And I know that we are at 102, but I do just want to do a quick baby plug in terms of the organization that I work for. I know many of you all think that I work for Texas Counts, but I don't. I work for Every Texan. And we are a public policy, social justice nonprofit based in Austin, Texas. And really what we do as an organization is we strengthen public policy to expand opportunities and equity for Texans of all backgrounds. And so essentially what my organization does is that I work with a lot of data wonks, a lot of most of my coworkers are policy analysts, and they're the ones looking at the data, analyzing the data. And with that, they develop policy solutions and recommendations. They go out and educate local and state policymakers. They partner with different organizations and coalitions, and then they just advocate for common sense policy. And so we are the folks kind of behind the scenes looking at the data and putting forth some really strong policy recommendations that will lead to a more equitable Texas. Oops, I hyperlinked that, and that's why, there we go. And so with our work, we definitely are always looking at the data and the numbers, but through the 2020 census work, we know that when we hear from trusted voices on the ground, we know that you are the ones who know your communities best and know what our communities need to thrive. And so while we are looking at the data and kind of sitting in front of our computers, that community voice and that community perspective is so important. And so as an organization and in my role as the community engagement coordinator, I am calling on you to continue to engage and collaborate with me because I want to ensure that we're incorporating the voices of your communities in the work that we do. And more specifically, my organization focuses on healthcare, food security, education, jobs and financial security, budget and taxes, equity and inequality. These are all things that have touched our 2020 census work or maybe inspired us to be engaging in this work. And again, as census champions, we know how the census directly impacts these issues in our communities. And I did want to pull out just specifically what my organization works on. We work on health insurance coverage, immigrant access to healthcare, affordability, food assistance programs like SNAP and school meals, which we know is directly impacted by census funding. In education, we work on early ed and pre-K, K through 12, higher education. We talk about fair wages, cash assistance, paid sick days. And then when we think about equity and inequality, talking about obviously folks of color, race equity, our immigrant communities, low-income Texans, kids. And then we also talk about just kind of those budgets and taxes and where the money comes from and where the money goes. And so if any of that resonates with you, if you want to take your advocacy work to kind of the next level to advocate for equitable policies for Texans, I highly encourage you to continue to connect with me, to connect with us. My email address is there. And then I also just wanted to link in two really great things. We just put out an equitable economic recovery for every Texan. And this just talks about policy solutions for an equitable recovery during and beyond the COVID-19 crisis. And then we know that the Texas legislature will be meeting in the 2021. And so if you want to keep up to date on what's going on at the Texas legislature, sign up for our newsletter there. And then of course, my email address is there if you ever need to get in contact with me, which I hope that you do. But with that, I just talked a whole lot as I typically do. We were pulling some numbers, and I think in terms of times that we were live on Facebook, over 22,000 minutes of video was watched via the Texas Counts social Facebook page, which is pretty crazy to think about. But again, thank you for continuing to tune in, to make sure your communities are empowered and part of this process. And with that, I will, I'm so bad at goodbyes. I don't want to say goodbye, but we will be in touch soon just in terms of how you can engage in this evaluation process and we start putting together the Texas Counts report. Again, on behalf of my co-presenters, Dr. Lila Valencia and Genesis Sanchez, thank you for continuing to engage in this work with us. We hope that you continue engaging and collaborating with us in the future. And we will not be saying goodbye. We will just be saying, see you soon. I have seen a lot of action in the chat and Q&A box. So I'm going to pause there if anyone does have any specific questions, comments, or concerns. But if not, we will sign off for one last time from the Texas Counts Census Update. And I am looking at this chat box, and it is just full of lots and lots of love and gratitude and folks wanting to continue to stay engaged in this work. So again, we are so appreciative of you and all of the work and efforts that you have led over the past year, over the past years. Thank you for everything. Again, we will be in touch with folks very, very soon. And yes, stay safe out there. Make sure that you vote. Early voting in Texas ends on October 30th. And of course, Election Day is next Tuesday. But with that, stay safe, everyone, and we will talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody.